Good industrial techno requires two fundamental sounds. One of them is obviously the kick drum. I play the kick and I need more sounds to fill the beat. So I add a lead synthesizer, some percussion sounds, and the beat still doesn't sound industrial enough. What is the difference between my beat and techno made by artists like Ayarkana or KRTM? The answer is... exactly. The second fundamental of industrial techno is the noise. It isn't as easy as slapping a white noise over the kick, but once you watch my tutorial, you will discover that making rhythmic noise textures isn't that difficult either and can be even very creative. This tutorial is for both FL Studio and Ableton users, meaning that I will be working in these two DAWs in parallel whenever there will be a difference in the workflow. Also, all the sounds you have heard so far are the part of my upcoming hard/industrial techno sample and preset pack. Sign up to my waiting list, download a demo version of the pack and get a discount to buy the full product once it's released. My approach to making rhythmic noise textures will be following: create a sound that gives the rhythm, create some noise, and combine these two with magic spells and effects. If we think of a rhythm, usually we think of using a sidechain compression, tweaking a volume envelope, or adding a LFO. But in music, what is the most rhythmic is the percussion. Let's make use of drum loops or amen breaks. Just listen to that groove. Alright, we are going to chop this loop and alter the rhythm. Right-click the sample and open it in new SliceX channel. SliceX is a more sophisticated version of Fruity Slicer with more features, but don't be afraid as we are going to use mainly the most basic ones. This plugin chops any sample into individually modifiable audio clips called markers. The markers are automatically sequenced in a MIDI clip, where most of the rhythmic fun will begin soon. We can notice the chopped break sounds here slightly different than in the browser. This is caused by the tempo difference. The amen break has the tempo of 172 BPM, while our project has the tempo of 150. But that's totally fine. The different sound means that SliceX has automatically synchronized the break to the tempo of our project. How to alter the current rhythm? At first, the easiest way would be to use the master pitch fader that pitches all the markers up or down while making them simultaneously shorter or longer. I mentioned earlier that the MIDI clip is where all the fun begins, so let's get into it. In the piano roll, I can rearrange all the markers to create new unique rhythms. Take some time to create a new sequence where you can play more than a single marker at the same time. You might think that all the markers sound too aggressive and there is a need to add a short fade in to all of them. In SliceX, all the markers are accessible from that list and individually modifiable. Each marker has its own articulator assigned, and by default, all the markers are assigned to the first one. An articulator can be treated as a set of individual filter and envelope settings that are later assigned in that matrix. Since all the markers are assigned to the first articulator, we only have to adjust one volume envelope to create a fade-in for all the markers. Let's turn on that envelope and adjust it. There are more ways to alter the markers, but since I like the sound without adjustments more, let me disable that volume envelope. If I was about to do the same thing in Ableton, I would have to create a new drum rack channel, onto which I load the break into a pad. I changed the simpler to the slice mode to place the markers. The sample is not chopped yet. If I want to alter the pitch and length of the markers in the exact same way as in FL Studio, I make sure to deselect warping. Now I right-click the break and select Slice to New MIDI track. The break is chopped and the MIDI clip is created. To change the pitch of the break, adjust the pitch of any slice with the transpose knob, and then right-click that knob and select Copy Value to Siblings. That will apply the same transpose to all the chopped pieces. Adding the fade into the markers is done in the exact same way. The last thing is to sequence a rhythm in the MIDI clip. The sound that gives the rhythm is finished, so now we will move on to creating the noise. But before that, let me advertise myself quickly and just say that if you wish to have other sound design or music production subjects explained in such an easy and practical way, consider going onto my website to learn more about my private music production lessons. Free consultations are available as well. The noise creation would be extremely easy. In Serum, I just turn off the oscillator A and turn on the noise oscillator. Pick the noise sample you like, the analog category is vast enough, adjust its pitch and play a long sustained note. Both sounds will be blended by using the vocoder. This effect is responsible for any sort of robotic voice vocals or demonic kinds of vocals. The vocoder needs two signals to work. The first signal is the modulator that is going to alter the second signal, the carrier. Vocoder listens to the modulator signal and takes its amplitude in time and frequency spectrum. The frequency spectrum is filtered using a series of bandpass filters and is applied later to the carrier signal. In other words, the carrier is played in a way to resemble the modulator signal in regards to its amplitude and frequency content after filtering. In the case of our noise texture, the noise from Serum will become our carrier signal and the chopped aim and break will be our modulator. In FL Studio, I assigned both signals to separate mixer channels. It pays off to label them correctly to avoid any mistakes. In the carrier channel, I add the vocodecs. The first thing would be to tell the vocodecs what is the carrier and what is the modulator. This is done in the top section with these two rectangles. The left one relates to the modulator and the right one to the carrier. The 0 digit refers to the channel to which the vocodecs is applied, so currently the vocodecs thinks that our Serum noise is both the modulator and carrier. While the carrier is by default set correctly, the modulator rectangle has to be adjusted. Before I do that, I have to make the vocodecs detect our aim and break, that is the modulator. In the mixer, I click on the break channel and on the bottom I right click the arrow that belongs to the carrier channel. Choose sidechain to this track only. This changes the signal routing in the mixer. We redirected the break channel from the master channel to the noise one. This knob is turned all the way down, which means that through the noise channel the aim and break won't be hearable at all. It makes total sense if we want to hear in the end only the altered noise from Serum. With that kind of routing, the vocodecs will detect now our break channel. The last thing is to change the digit in the modulator rectangle to 1. The vocodecs can be adjusted now. In the upper part of the vocodecs, the most important will be the section with 3 faders and 3 knobs. They allow you to mix in 3 different signals. Starting from the left, we can add the dry modulator signal after it's passed through an adjustable high-pass filter. This fader adds the dry carrier signal after it's passed through an adjustable low-pass filter. With the last fader, I can add into the vocodecs input a noise that is filtered with a high-pass filter. The most exciting though is the section in the middle. The first thing would be to reduce the number of bandpass filters that vocodecs uses. The less bands, the less detailed and metallic the sound. The filter curve of each bandpass filter is tweaked with the order switch. The filters can be fine-tuned in few other ways with the remaining knobs to the right. The FL Studio manual gives a good description of them, but from the practical point of view, just set them up to your taste. All the parameters we have just tweaked were related to the frequencies and bandpass filters. The remaining parameters to the left are responsible for the volume dynamics of the vocal text output signal. You can treat them like the classic controls for any AHDSR volume envelope you can find in the Serum synthesizer, for example. I will adjust these three most important controls now. I heavily recommend increasing the release time. The vocoder is set up, so let's see how to achieve a similar effect with Ableton's vocoder. The vocoder should be added to the modulator signal, that is to our chopped break. The section to the left selects a carrier signal. Ableton's vocoder can use its own noise as a carrier, but to ensure a similar result, I will expand the list and choose an external carrier signal. In the second list below, I pick a channel in which I have already loaded Serum with the same noise preset as in FL Studio. This channel doesn't have to be turned on to make the vocoder work. Now, how to blend in the extra signals in a similar way as in the FL Studio. If I use an audio effect track for parallel processing, I can put the vocoder in the first chain with dry wet set to 100%, and in the second chain I can add a high pass filter. This substitutes the filtered modulator signal blend-in fader. The carrier signal can be mixed in by duplicating the noise channel, adding a low pass filter and using the volume control. And in the vocoder itself, I can mix into its input a noise with adjustable volume and its envelope. The noise can follow the modulator's dynamics fast or slow. This fader tells by how much the extra noise follows modulator's dynamics. I have highlighted now the controls that relate to filters and frequencies. Some of them, like the bands control, work exactly the same as in the middle right section of the vocoder. Now the controls that are related to the dynamics of the vocoder output are highlighted. Again, I would consider the release knob to be the most important among all these controls. The vocoder is all set up. From now on we will be processing the noise with mainly third-party effects. In Ableton we would add them to the group processing. In FL Studio we have to add them right after the vocodecs. I begin with a bit crusher where the most important thing is to reduce the bit depth. In T16 mode 2, this is done in the quantizer section. Simply drop the resolution to make the noise crackling and choppy. To fine-tune this behavior, tweak the zithering knob. And to add crazy amount of extra noise, turn off the DC shift switch. In the middle section we can adjust the sample rate reduction. Start out by tweaking the frequency knob, that is the most important. and then use remaining controls for minor influence over the sound. It's difficult to explain the remaining controls behavior, so just set them up according to your taste. The bit crusher added a cool texture to the sound, but the noise sounds too dry. After the Decimode, I would recommend using reverb to make the sound smoother. Tal Reverb 4 is a good freeware recommendation if you look for non-aggressive sound. The reverb shouldn't be long, do not bloat the sound, but it should be audible instead, so feel free to turn up the wet knob. The rhythm can be slightly altered with the pre-delay. In the end, filter out some low and high frequencies with low cut and high cut knobs. My recommendation would be to make the reverb sound dark. It pays off to glue the noise with the reverb to make the sound coherent. Before I use a more transparent effect for that purpose, I will use some distortion. This will roughly glue both sounds, but what's more important, it will also add some flavor to the noise. In the Camel Crusher plugin, I start by blending two different types of distortion together. Both noise and its reverb can be glued more in the compressor section. Of course, keep the fat mode on for that fat sound. In the master section, I tweak the try wet knob and adjust the output volume so I can A/B the plugin properly. Let's use the limiter to glue the reverb even more. Our sound already seems flat, so to create a pretty significant change in the sound, we will drop the threshold all the way down. The only time-related setting, that is the release, can fine-tune the compression. In theory, the faster release, the more aggressive compression. At last, compensate the output volume with the output knob. I will play the noise and turn on and off the limiter. Notice that when the sound is playing, the limiter doesn't do much, but once I stop the noise, the limiter will suddenly increase the volume of the reverb tail, and this will be the main difference in the sound with and without the limiter. Because we added some reverb earlier, the noise texture has some stereo width we can control. Similarly as with kick drums, I would say it's better to keep the noise texture more narrow. To do just that, in FL Studio I can load the Fruity Stereo Enhancer and turn the stereo separation knob to the right. In Ableton, we would use the utility and turn the width knob down. It's time for equalization. The most obvious thing will be to remove any low end from the noise to not interfere with the kick drum. There goes a high pass filter to make the sound lighter. To squeeze more air into the sound, you should boost frequencies from around 14 kHz. This will brighten up the noise and add lots of sparkle. In that noise, I can hear some low-pitched hiss that bloats the beat, making it sound less clean. To get rid of that, I can try cutting the area from 1 to 2 kHz. Remaining frequencies can be basically boosted or attenuated according to your liking, so make sure to not overdo anything, otherwise the noise texture will sound too annoying. The last thing is the rhythm enhancement. Everyone knows that sidechained lead or pad sounds enhance the groove by a lot, and the same can be said about our noise textures. I grabbed the Tal filter too and set up the modulation speed and target to be able to synchronize the volume automation with the kick drum. The simplest sidechain curve can look and sound like this. But I recommend trying out a, let's say, 2-step sidechain curve. It means adding an extra point to the curve to make the modulation more sophisticated. In the end, I have set up the automation in this way. The depth knob has been turned down greatly since I don't want to add too much of the pumping to not make my beat sound like trance techno.